It's getting cold, isn't it? In the winter of 62 to 63, 1962 to 1963, we had the biggest freeze. In fact, it's known as the biggest freeze of 1963 for 300 years. Prior to that, the winter in the UK, the coldest was in, I think, 1709, which was colder. But in 1963, that beginning January time was really, really cold. A blizzard came at the end of December and it swept across from the west, causing all sorts of things to happen. Huge drifts up to 20 feet deep of snow, lakes freezing, roads cut off, houses disappearing under vast quantities of snow, villages almost invisible. It's absolutely astounding. Now, I was yet to be born. I was 6 months away from visiting this world. So I was in my mother's stomach at the time. Well, not in her stomach, obviously, in the womb. And I was yet to arrive. And my parents have told me about that winter when they were alive, and they remember it, as so many people who witnessed it did. It was a time when it was freezing, and it's getting cold now. It's not actually that cold in my house, fortunately, to wear these outfits that I'm just wearing. But it is getting cold, and I dare say people are feeling it. However, if you put in the big freeze of 63 into Google and have a look at the images, you'll be amazed at these huge snowdrifts, these scenes with the lakes and the rivers all frozen, waterfalls, people out on skis, all sorts of interesting things, you know, throwing snowballs and all of that. And in fact, as you scroll through the pictures, it's almost as if you see this blitz spirit. Yes, people were under great strain with the snow, and I dare say many impoverished people in those sort of old houses would have perished, unfortunately. Old people and babies probably would have suffered the worst. And that's true, because back in those days, let's face it, we didn't have the same type of heating. Probably fewer people, well, much fewer people would have had any form of central heating. My dad would have had one of those Aladdin paraffin lamps, no doubt. There would have been some form of gas fires, I dare say, and I imagine there were oil-fueled radiators and things like that. I seem to remember that in the 70s. As I say, I wasn't born around there, so I don't have exact memories of it, only what my parents said. But somehow they got through. Of course, they were burning coal in their fire grates or logs to keep themselves warm. They could huddle up, and they did, of course, put on jumpers and hats and mittens, and they just got on with it. As I say, there was this sort of collective spirit that we're all in it together. It wasn't just in the south, it was right across the country, the big freeze. And when you look at the pictures, you see how the school buses were, the roads, people out there with shovels digging away the snow so that the school buses can get through, so that the trains can still work, so that we still were able to pull together and get on with it. Of course, I know what you'll say. You'll say, of course, back then, global warming, man-made, climate change hadn't been invented, had it? No, the big companies and the elites and the government and the leftists and people like that had yet to sort of, on the environmentalists, had yet to sort of make up this thing about, oh, wait a minute, the planet is going to warm and we're all going to burn up, and we shouldn't be burning our coal fires. In fact, we should not have them at all when it's cold. We should make sure that we just put on another jumper. Mind you, luckily back then in the 1960s, we didn't have Putin to have to sacrifice ourselves and freeze to death during the winter so that we could somehow put an end to Putin and the war in Ukraine. Because we didn't have all that nonsense back then. We just had each other, and we got ourselves together. And somehow we did it. And I'm sure that we can do that again. We are a very innovative type of people. We don't like people telling us, you know, to sacrifice yourself and just put on a jumper or another pair of mittens and you'll be all right. Of course we don't. We're resilient and we can do these things. It's interesting because now it's almost as if we're happy to let the elites and the government and the so-called our betters to tell us what to do. They're trying to be in charge and throw their weight around. Well, I don't think that we need to. It's very strange that we've just not thought about this really. The war with Ukraine, which I think is the reason that we're being told that we've got to sacrifice ourselves and be colder and just deal with it and don't put too much coal on the fire, or any coal, of course, because of the carbon footprint that would do, or turn your central heating down and, you know, just let only your feet and your fingers have the frostbite, but the rest of you should be okay. This war has been going on for a year. I think we should have been doing something about it. We knew that winter was coming. We'd had a pandemic. We knew that in the winter something happens. That oh yeah, what is it? Flu. Do you remember flu? We used to have flu. Of course, we managed to eradicate flu, didn't we, for 2 years because there was something else and flu wasn't a thing. In fact, nothing else was a thing, if I remember rightly. The National Health Service had suspended its activities and just became the National COVID Service. I mean, you know, because we weren't really dealing with terrible things like cancer and things like that. We just had this one problem, and in order to not see all the other problems, we just locked everybody into their houses, and that seemed to solve it, didn't it? It was much easier if we just close everybody up, lock them away, and they don't have to come out and tell us that they're not very happy. We'll let them out for an hour a day to sort of wander about a bit, but make sure you're stuck in there. Yeah. So as the winter has approached, we never thought about, oh, okay, we've had this war, we're having a problem with our gas supplies. We're telling everybody not to burn coal or oil or anything like that because it's terribly bad, you know, because there's these protesters. Have you noticed there are these protesters who sort of sit down on the motorways? You didn't see them in 1963 gluing themselves. Well, you wouldn't have seen them even if they were there. Even if the idea had been there, they would have been covered with snow and nobody would have spotted them and they wouldn't have stopped anything, which would have been probably to everybody's advantage. But instead of that, we should have been thinking about what are we going to do? Well, we could have been fracking. You know, we could have been looking at the treasure beneath our feet and thinking, actually, we have the opportunity to dig down there and get some stuff out of the ground, which would be beneficial. Okay, it's a fossil fuel, but it'll get us out of trouble. It will stop people from dying for the short term during the transition. We could have also just knocked this net zero nonsense on the head and said, look, this is costing so much money. Let's just suspend, even if we believed that it was going to be something that was actually achievable, we could say, do you know what, until we've got the transition properly organised, until we've got the windmills and these the solar panels everywhere to sufficiently create enough electricity so that we can heat everybody's homes, so that large industry can operate, so that big container ships can actually sail across the ocean, so that all the network of lorries can go up and down the motorways and supply everybody with all their special parcels that they've been ordering online whilst they've been trapped inside. Once we've got that infrastructure there in place, that's the time to sort of reduce the fossil fuels, not before all of that, because that's just a nonsense. So we could have been doing so many things, but we chose not to. When I say we, of course, I don't actually mean us, the people, you know, the plebeians, or whatever the word is, the plebs, the unintelligent, the sheep, the people that are just there to be manipulated. Can't even say it. Manipulated. No, the elites, these very clever people who'd been to these private schools, who know everything, but they know nothing. And we could have been planning for this. And here's an idea, what we could have said. Here's an idea. Why, instead of when fuel is being used at the huge amount that it would be during the winter to keep everybody warm, instead of putting the prices up and letting the large, big companies that supply it make huge profits, why not force them to reduce their fees completely or subsidise them in some way so that it's cheaper in the winter to use fuel, whatever fuel it is, and more expensive to use it in the summer. I grant you, not many people would need it in the summer, so you're not going to have such high bills. Even if they increase the cost, it would be far better that everybody felt at ease to be able to, okay, I can keep warm. All right, you may say, look, just don't go too mad, but certainly heat your house. Don't get frozen extremities or anything like that. There was so much opportunity, but for some reason, and I don't really understand it, and I'm sure there's some cleverer people out there than me, they thought, no, what we'll do is we'll increase the price so it's extremely expensive for people. They'll freeze to death, and that will be really useful. I can't see how that is. This bunch of nutters who are sort of ruling us have really got to go. And I think in 2 years' time, there's a chance, there's an opportunity to use the power that we do have, the vote, to try and find somebody else who will look after us and think ahead and not treat us like complete idiots.